Dear painters and friends, in today's video we will look at painting stone steps, railings and the wall with a piece of portal. My goal is to disrupt the uniform grey of the stone. I will start with the standard blue-white pre-shading. First, I will highlight the joints between the stones. I will start on the back wall, then the stone railing with the coat of arms, the stone steps, the portal and the stone path. Then I will start applying the paint from the bottom up, mostly on the back wall. This will highlight the structure of the individual stones. I will not forget the lower part, which is under the stairs. I apply the white paint from top to bottom using an airbrush. On the back wall, I highlight the structure of the stone blocks. This prepares the base for further color layers. For the stone path and stairs, I focus on the middle of the individual stones. I apply the paint in such a way that I leave the dark edges and only put the color in the middle of the stone or on the edges of the stairs. I proceeded in the same way as on the stone wall with the stone railing and the coat of arms. I focused on the individual stones to achieve a nice pre-shading and on the coat of arms so that the paint went from top to bottom. I noticed an interesting thing. From the front of the railing, where the coat of arm is, they are regular cubes and cuboids. You can see nice straight sides. As soon as you look from the other side, they are stones of random shape. Nothing regular, no square or rectangular shapes. Yeah, just for fun. Let's move on. I will finish the pedestal and see how it looks. Even like this, blue and white, the pedestal prepared like this looks very nice. For the next work on the pedestal, I will prepare a reddish-brown color, a light gray and gray color. I will work with very thin paint. My goal is not to cover the blue and white stones. I need to use the previous work, so I will apply thin paint. I start with gray and select the cubes to which I will apply this color. The color is thin, and the blue and white color on the base shines through slightly. Gray color, and not only gray color, has a different shade on a blue background and on white. On a white background, the color is lighter, and a blue background, the color is little darker. By applying a thin color on a blue-white or a black-white background, I partially shade this color. I add light gray color and paint the remaining stones. Again, very thin color. At the same time, I start mixing these two colors with each other. I paint some light gray, some dark gray, sometimes I mix the colors, sometimes I leave only a light gray stone. Irregularity, that is our goal. When I finished painting both grays, I started applying a red-brown shade, very thin and randomly. This gave the stone wall a third color. I paint the wall from memory, but I definitely recommend finding a stone wall and trying to paint an exact copy of it. The result will be authentic. I used the same painting technique for the stone steps as on the wall, randomly applied gray colors. I need the stones to be in their base color. Oil washes will follow, which will change the look a lot, but you will still be working with the gray base. I did the stone path with a slightly faster method, irregular gray spots. I choose a light gray for the stone coat of arms because I think it was made from a single piece of stone, maybe sandstone. I also wanted to have a light element on a dark background. And now my favorite part, working with oils. I prepared earthy shades. I also have yellow paint there, but I didn't use it in the end. I'm going to create a very thin paint, a kind of colored water. All paint are fully opaque. It would be different with transparent paints, which don't need to be diluted that much. I mixed black and brown paint and added a lot of thinner. I started applying this thin paint to the stones. I created a thin filter and at the same time a wash that filled in the joints depressions and cracks. After the first layer, the stones start to look very believable. I like working with oil because of its raw look. I made an oil film all over the base, on the stone wall, stairs, railing and portal. I plan to liven up the cold look of the stone castle a bit, so I also invited green paint to work. I diluted the paint again and started applying it to places that were probably attacked by moss due to humidity. This means various corners, edges and depressions. I also applied a very thin layer to the stone coat of arms, adding more paint on the lower edges. My oil filter is drying, and in the meantime I will prepare to oil paints again. This time I first apply them to paper to get rid of the preservation oil and only then to the palette. This will ensure faster drying. I mixed two shades of grey. First, I mixed black and brown. I took a little of the resulting mix and put it aside. I created one row by adding yellow and the second row by adding white. I prepared an older, flat brush with soft bristles, the good old dry brush technique. I dipped the brush in the paint, wiped the excess paint on the napkin, and began to gently run the brush over the stones. The colors will start to stick to the raised areas. Because it is an oil paint, the paint does not leave sharp transitions, as can be the case with acrylic paint. Slowly, the edges of the individual stones begin to lighten and the structure of the stone is highlighted. I always focus on the top of each stone to create the illusion of light falling from above. I mix a lighter shade on the palette when needed. I can also use a flat brush to mix the colors. Then I wipe the brush on a napkin and continue painting. The color is not very contrasting, so I thought about using acrylics next time, but for now I will finish everything with oil. I continue to apply the color and mix the lighter shade. I return to the same place again and apply a lighter shade of gray. I keep thinking that the upper parts of the stones are lighter than the lower parts. I also vary the shade of paint that I apply to the stones. I apply a warmer gray to the light stones and a cooler shade of gray to the darker stones. I try to break up the uniform look of the stone wall. I slowly move on the other parts of the base. For the stone portal, I try to have a very light upper part of the portal. That's why I add more and more light gray. I also use the dry brush method to nicely highlight the decorated part of the stone portal. Even though it is a somewhat rogue painting technique, thanks to oil paint, smooth and soft transitions are created. That's why I have never excluded this technique from my list. On the stone railing, I nicely highlight the individual stones and their edges. I don't press on the brush and use a small amount of paint. I always remove excess paint from the brush. The stone coat of arms will beautifully show its relief thanks to this technique. I concentrate more paint on the upper part of the coat of arms, where I am not afraid to put a lot of light gray paint. For the stone stairs, the procedure is a little different. Here I also concentrate on the individual stone, but I apply the paint to the middle of each stone. For the stairs, I also apply it to the edge of each step. It is the place that is most stressed and worn by everyday walking. Small stones and sand on the soles constantly abrade the stone, not only due to reduce its thickness, which you can see in various castle stairs or cathedral stairs, but they also make the stone steps not straight, but they also lighten the stone. Therefore, I apply a lighter gray color mainly to the edge of each stone on the staircase. I keep thinking about where people walk the most and where the stones are most worn. Here I switch to a different style of applying paint. I apply the paint to the step with one flat brush and soften the transitions with a clean flat brush. I will use the dry brush technique again for the stone path, all over the path, just to highlight the structure. I will continue to highlight individual part of the base. I will return to the stone path where I will lighten the inner parts of the stones, and I have this part of the painting done. There is a holder on the stone wall. Originally, there was supposed to be a torch there, but I decided to put a flag there. I needed to paint the holder. I started with black paint to unify the surface and prepare the base for the next layers of paint. Next came a darker shade of silver paint. I applied 2 thin coats to the holder. Since the holder is constantly under attack from the sun, wind, snow, frost and other weather conditions, this will also affect its appearance. Therefore, I applied black and brown washes to create wear and tear. 1 thin coat of each color is enough. Finally, I used silver paint to highlight the edges of the holder. And since the flag holder is made of metal, I prepare an earthy and brick color to create rust. The green color is ready for the next step that will follow. I first diluted the earthy brown paint and made 1 very thin filter over the metal holder, the beginnings of corrosion. The subsequent brick shade already represents the rusty part of the metal holder. I apply the paint around the rivets and joints where water stays and disrupts the metal surface. If I feel that I have applied too much paint, I just need to wash the brush and remove the paint with the damp brush. And because this holder has been on the wall for quite some time, the rust is starting to flow down the stone wall. I use the same earth color to represent the rust flowing down. I adjust the shape of the flowing rust with the damp brush. And now for the green color that we prepare together with the earthen and brick colors. I dilute the color and start creating damp places where various mosses molds, etc. start to grow. These are various corners, edges, joints or cracks. With a flat brush, I can soften the edges of the applied paint. I also apply the green color to the wall because water seeps up the wall. The stone railing is also exposed to weather conditions, so I will create dripping dirt here too. It is a nice detail that will add credibility. And I can declare the first part finished. Even though I try to achieve a colored look, it is still a stone castle. A bit of a dead stone castle despite all the various mosses, dirt, dripping, rust, etc. That is why I decided to bring more life to these stone walls. We will talk about it and show it next time. Thank you very much for your attention and for watching the video to the end. See you soon.